He was invisible in that boardroom, just a kitchen helper, moving quietly in the background while powerful men and women debated millions. But what no one knew was that he carried a secret more valuable than every deal on the table. When the Yaobas billionaire Chinese CEO struggled to make himself understood, the room grew tense, the whispers sharper, the bias undeniable. And then, in a moment no one expected, the invisible man stepped forward. What happened next turned the entire meeting upside down and exposed a truth they could never ignore. He was never supposed to matter in that room, just a kitchen helper expected to stay silent while the powerful made their deals. But as the billionaire Chinese CEO struggled to be understood, the room's silence turned sharp, dripping with arrogance and hidden prejudice. No one looked his way. No one imagined he held the key. Until, with a voice that shattered the tension, he revealed a truth that stunned everyone. How could the man they ignored so easily be the one who changed everything? The meeting began with polished confidence, sharp suits, glossy reports, the hum of translation devices ready at every seat. But something was off. The billionaire Chinese CEO, calm and precise in his delivery, spoke words that never quite reached the audience. The translator fumbled, twisting his meaning, watering down his authority. What should have been a presentation of strength became a spectacle of confusion. The executives smirked, whispered, exchanged glances that burned with arrogance, and there he was, the kitchen helper, moving trays and water glasses, pretending not to notice. But he did notice. He noticed the way their laughter wasn't innocent, the way their jokes dripped with condescension. Every slip of the translator made the room colder, more hostile, and with each passing minute, the CEO's respect eroded in their eyes. The helper clenched his jaw, knowing the truth. The CEO wasn't failing. He was being failed. But who would believe that? He was invisible to them. Just another black man, in uniform, faceless, voiceless. And yet, he understood every word the CEO spoke, perfectly. His years spent learning Mandarin in secret, working nights and studying by day, came rushing back to him in that moment. Still, he stayed silent. Because stepping forward meant risk. Risk of ridicule, risk of being told to know his place. But watching the CEO's words crumble under mistranslation felt like watching a man's dignity stripped piece by piece, and no one seemed to care. Then came the turning point. One executive leaned back, loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe he doesn't even know what he's talking about. The room erupted in polite laughter. The CEO's eyes flickered, hurt masked by composure, but the wound was visible. The helper's hands trembled as he poured another glass of water. How long could he stand by, knowing he held the truth? The whispers grew sharper, the smirks bolder. Deals were at stake, reputations on the line, and still, the helper remained unseen, serving those who dismissed him. But inside, something was breaking. This wasn't just mistranslation anymore. It was a deliberate dismissal of a man's worth, his culture, his very voice. And in that suffocating silence, as the CEO paused to gather himself, the helper felt the weight of two worlds pressing down. The one that demanded his silence and the one screaming for justice. What he chose to do next would not only shock the boardroom, it would flip the balance of power in an instant. The room was moments away from collapsing into humiliation for the CEO. Another smirk, another laugh. The translator stammered again, twisting his words into nonsense. And then, before he even realized he'd stood up, the kitchen helper's voice cut through the air. Clear, confident, fluent Mandarin. Every head snapped toward him, disbelief written on their faces. The words he repeated weren't just translation. They carried the CEO's authority, his vision, his brilliance. Suddenly the smirks froze, the whispers died, the air thickened with shock. For the first time, the CEO's message landed exactly as intended, strong, precise, powerful, And it came not from a polished executive, but from the man they had all ignored, the one they thought existed only to pour water and clear plates. The silence that followed was louder than any insult. Eyes darted, excuses forming, but none of them mattered anymore. The helper had torn down the illusion of superiority with nothing more than truth. But beneath the awe, a new tension simmered. Because in that instant, the hierarchy of the room shifted. The helper had broken an unspoken rule. He had stepped beyond the role they assigned him, and the looks on their faces revealed it, shock mixed with something darker. How dare he, in their eyes, prove himself indispensable? Yet he stood, firm, refusing to shrink back. For once, the power wasn't theirs to control, and in that fragile, breathless moment, the question hung heavy in the air. Would they recognize his courage, or try to erase it? The shock in that boardroom lingered long after the last words were spoken. The billionaire CEO, once dismissed as confused, now stood tall, his vision restored, his dignity defended by the very man no one thought mattered. For a fleeting moment, respect filled the air, not just for the CEO, but for the helper who refused to stay invisible. Yet beneath the surface, the sting of racism still pulsed. Because the truth was clear. If that helper hadn't spoken up, the CEO's brilliance would have been buried under prejudice and arrogance. And if he had stayed silent, his years of knowledge and hard work would have remained unseen, simply because of the color of his skin and the uniform he wore. That's the reality so many live every day. Not a lack of talent, not a lack of worth, but a lack of recognition. Doors closed, voices ignored, brilliance overlooked, until someone dares to break the silence. For the kitchen helper, that day changed everything. He wasn't just the man who carried trays anymore. He was the man who changed the course of a meeting, who forced powerful people to confront their bias. But it should never have taken an act of defiance to prove his humanity, and that's the larger truth. How many voices are still being silenced right now? How many ideas are dismissed before they're even spoken, simply because of who carries them? This story may have ended with a moment of respect, but the fight for dignity and equality is far from over. The question is, will we keep letting prejudice decide who gets heard, or will we finally start listening to every voice?